Let's talk more then about the events of the past 24 hours, shall we? And to do that, I'm joined from our Pretoria studios by the Solidarity Research Institute's Connie Mulder. And I must just tell you, before I come to you, Connie, that we had also invited a representative from the NUM to be part of our discussion tonight, but he unfortunately had to pull out due to a family emergency just under an hour ago. So we will try, or endeavour at least, to bring you as many perspectives on this story as possible. But back to you, Connie Mulder, in our Pretoria studios from the Solidarity Research Institute. So we've heard there from the last two people, Sikonati and the other expert on this issue, really giving Andre de Ruyter the thumbs up as he prepares to go into Eskom come January. Do you also think he'll be able to steer the ship?
Well, good evening firstly. I think Mr. de Ruyter has the unenviable task of maybe getting the toughest job in South Africa at the moment. We're obviously, as South African citizens, hoping that he manages to turn it around. From Solidarity's point of view, we've always been committed to keeping the lights on. If you remember, due to industrial action last year, South Africa was thrown into load shedding, and our members literally slept in power stations and worked overtime to ensure that the lights stay on. So if Mr. de Ruyter would follow these same steps, then we'll be behind him 100%. But we are slightly worried. There's a couple of things that worry us. The number one thing, or obstacle facing Mr. de Ruyter would be Eskom's balance sheet, and he would need to get buy-in from creditors as well as government to manage the debt crisis that Eskom finds itself in and get repayment terms that make sense. The second big obstacle that would be in his way is getting the buy-in of labour and managing the unbundling process into these three different units that we've now seen mapped out with the roadmap. And the question would be if Mr. de Ruyter would be able to get enough political will behind this unbundling to be able to force it through against what we've now seen deemed to be fierce resistance.
Let me ask you then, based on that long list of obstacles ahead for de Ruyter before he even begins this job, and the fact that Eskom in the last 12 years has had upward of 10 CEOs, what are the chances? Is he now facing a losing battle, essentially? Is he being set up to fail?
I wouldn't think he's being set up to fail. The last 12 years, however, Eskom has looked massively different. If you remember, we had the Guptas basically running Eskom, with those CEOs running against a buzzsaw of state capture. Mr. de Ruyter has a great opportunity. What is worrying, however, is this is a very tough job. If Mr. Hadebe couldn't manage it, then Mr. de Ruyter has his work cut out. In his favour, however, is the fact that not necessarily Nampak, but he did run Sasol, which is also 30,000 workers, for quite some time, which means he's got experience of running very large corporations and maybe trimming some of getting the inefficiencies out of the system and making sure that power gets generated and that the lights stay on in South Africa. We hope that he succeeds. We'll try and support the lights staying on in South Africa in any way possible. We've supplied government with a list of skilled employees who have left Eskom for greener pastures overseas, who are now building power plants in the Philippines and those areas, who are willing to come back and who are willing to participate in Eskom in South Africa and to help rebuild this power network. We hope that Mr. de Ruyter takes this list seriously and engages with us and other organised labour organisations to ensure that the unbundling process happens and that we can finally get to a place where we have a stable power network and that we can get this economy growing.
I'm glad you mentioned Nampak, because that's where Mr. de Ruyter will be leaving from when he goes to Eskom. When he arrived there in 2014, the share price was upward of 40 Rand. As he leaves, it's just above 7 Rand. Yes, there were external factors as well. You look at the company's net debt ratio, that's also quite significant. He'd managed to reduce it to about 37%, but it's now back up above the 50% mark. And you look at Nampak, much smaller than Eskom, and the problems perhaps not as complex as those that come with the power utility. Given that he was unable to make massive changes at Nampak, how on earth should we expect him to tackle something as huge and complicated as Eskom?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, Nampak was 2014. You should also look before that at his time at Sasol, in which he managed to run that company quite efficiently, which is a larger and South African company. Regarding the share price for Nampak, there are several external factors. We're not going to give him a glowing stamp of approval for what he did at Nampak necessarily, but that does prove is he worked in extremely trying circumstances in a turnaround scenario. One of the advantages from his time at Nampak is that he works closely with Minister Mboweni, and Eskom will not be able to succeed in any turnaround if there isn't an extreme level of trust between Treasury and Eskom's executive directors. Hopefully this relationship that has been fostered is one that can be used to finally sort out the massive cash flow problems as well as debt problems that Eskom finds itself in. So he's got an advantage from the time with Nampak due to the relationship that he fostered with government, and specifically Minister Mboweni, who's now holding the purse strings and is going to be who should be funding Eskom as far as possible for the rest of South Africa to keep the lights on and to keep the economy going. Because it's just quite simple. If Eskom fails, then South Africa fails, and we cannot afford that. Which means even if we don't agree with who the CEO is at the moment, we need to make sure that we support every single effort to turn this company around and not try to sabotage and wish that somebody fails. Rather try our absolute best to get this company going again, because we're all massively dependent on Eskom to ensure that this country keeps afloat.
Connie Mulder, hold on there for me, because I want us to take a quick breather and come back and talk about the other big issue around Mr. De Ruyter's appointment. That is transformation, drawing a lot of criticism. So stand by for me and we continue that conversation in just a moment. This is Nightline.